Played over 300 professional games. Of course, I would love to have done more in my career.
Are there any things you'd highlight as the more?
I would have loved to have gone on a Lions tour, obviously. Probably looking back, things that I regret rugby-wise was probably not speaking to a psychologist. I was lucky. I never struggled with mental health issues. I never struggled with depression or anxiety. But I'm not arrogant enough to think that I couldn't or wouldn't or won't. But I just think, would I have got a bit more from my career if I had? Because there's times I struggled and times I didn't necessarily want to play the game or wasn't full of confidence or wasn't able to get the most out of myself. Ruptured my Achilles in my last game for Scarlets and basically came back to Edinburgh, and within 6 months was kind of called into the office and said, we have the right to renegotiate your contract, and if you don't agree, terminate your contract. Talk about rugby family and rugby loyalty. And it was actually, well, you're going to totally shaft me. I basically said, look, I'll retire. I had a ruptured Achilles. I couldn't walk still. Who the hell is going to employ a retired ex-rugby player who has no commercial skills?
What do you see the bigger picture thinking being to improve the situation that the game's in?
There's a bit of a disconnect between the professional game and the amateur game, no matter where you go. But the amateur game pays for the professional game. And if they're disgruntled, they don't come to games. And if you want people to engage and you want people to sponsor it and you want people to get involved, every time you get to showcase it, it's got to be looking spot on. It's about creating global superstars. The more you embrace that, the better the game will be.
Do you have faith in the future? John. Hello.
Hello.
You're just round the corner.
I'm just round the corner.
This is mightily convenient, isn't it?
It is, and apologies for getting you up early.
Yeah, it's all right. We're in here most of the time, but it's at least we made it work. We've shuffled around a lot this week, but here we are. Here we are. So, how was it presenting a Rugby World Cup rather than playing in it?
Do you know what? I get asked all the time, the two things I get asked all the time, did I want to coach and do I miss rugby? And the answer is no and no. I kind of feel like I dodged a little bit with coaching. I don't know many coaches that really love it, and I think you have to really love it because it's much harder than playing from like a time commitment and pressure point of view. And the other one is, do I miss playing? And people find it confusing. I'm like, no, I don't miss playing. I played for 16 years and pretty much got everything I could out of the game. And the ending was, which you might get to, was a bit kind of limp in terms of going out during COVID. But I guess that's a long way of answering your question. My enjoyment from rugby now comes out of one, coaching my kids' team, and two, from commentating and presenting. So the World Cup it's mega. My World Cup experience as a player weren't amazing. So to actually go and be involved and to like go over it, I watch a lot of rugby and I see a lot of average rugby because it's just the nature of the beast. You see some average stuff, but I was over there for the two quarterfinals, the Ireland, New Zealand, and South Africa finals. Two best games I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, live. So
probably the best weekend of rugby ever.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it was like that kind of the London Olympics. They had that mad Saturday. I loved it. It's but it's the same as anything which I learned. It's like it's a team. If you're in a good team with good people, and you have a good crack, and you get to watch rugby with your mates, really, and that's what it is, and that's what it comes down to. I
saw you got quite passionate about a few things along the way. Just watching on the telly, thinking, right, there are a lot of opinions floating around the Rugby World Cup this year. What do you think was done well? What do you think could have been done better on the whole?
From a rugby, as in the playing point of view, or
just as a spectacle, because the World Cup itself it's the pinnacle of rugby, isn't it? It's meant to be what brings people into the game. It's meant to be what showcases what the game's capable of, what the operational capacity of the country is. And without getting all geopolitical, it's a case of what was your overall take on the success of the World Cup? What could have been done better? What could have been done worse on the whole?
I think that the challenge for rugby is, how does it grow to become? It's a global game, but how does it become more than just rugby? And if you watch the best or the most watched games in the world, the NFL, Super Bowl, there's more to the match than just the game. And I think they started to do a bit more of that, the pre-game stuff. We chatted with Jim just before we came on, getting Jared Butler involved, Rita, or getting people who are not necessarily rugby people involved in the game and growing it that way was brilliant. So I think as a spectacle, I think it was brilliant. Every game was sold out. The coverage was great. You get good people involved. I think it was a huge success. I think you can't control it. It would have been great to have France progress and have a home team. Obviously, we can't control that, but yeah, I just think, how does rugby grow? How do you keep getting the biggest spectacle, which is once every 4 years? And it was a huge success. There was a few issues with ticketing and all that, but you're going to have that anywhere you go. But everyone I spoke to who went over said it was mega. And I think it's something France do well. Obviously, the Olympics is there this year.
Yeah, it's this year, I think.
This year, yeah.
It's strange that we don't know that.
Yeah,
I had this conversation with somebody the other day.
It's very early in 2024.
With the Olympics coming up, I was like, is it this?
Skipped once they had to... I mean, I don't know.
I find it odd that I don't know as a big
I'll watch
sports fan. Yeah, correct. It won't quite be the golden era of London Olympics, just TV on all day, every day.
Yeah, but I think they just do it well. But like France, they had the Football World Cup. They've had the World Cup there in 2007, which was my first one, and they just do it well, and the people get behind it, and it's just one of those things you want to be part of. And I was there for a couple of weeks, and you feel like you're part of something bigger. So I guess the challenge, and I was chatting to Jim, but it's very easy to get very excited for the couple of weeks around the World Cup, and it was 7, 8, 9 weeks, whatever it was. How do you carry on momentum? How do you keep getting Jared Butler's involved, Javier Bardem? How do you keep getting these guys interested in the game? Because the reality is that the club game is well watched but you're a rugby diehard if you're going down to watch Edinburgh versus Cardiff on a Friday night. That's not your global audience. How do you keep, and that's the challenge for World Rugby, how do you keep people really engaged between tournaments? Because the reality is we get from the World Cup ended in October, we've got nothing till February, and then we've got nothing till, and no one really watches the summer tours hugely. How do you keep a sort of a global game interested and a global audience engaged for 12 months a year?
All against the background of the game getting increasingly physical, which means the gap between games, you can't play week in, week out like you would. And interesting that you mentioned the NFL, because we had Rory Lawson on and we had a direct comparison discussion on the two. And one of the clips that we discussed with him has popped off a little bit, and I'm going to bring up one of the comments on that YouTube video just to get your take on, because I think there's a real discrepancy in the UK, isn't there, with people's love and passion for the game versus the understanding of the just basic commerciality that's required to keep it as is. Because the game's struggling.
It's completely.
It is struggling. So the question is, how is that solved so that in 15 years' time the game can continue and union doesn't become a fringe sport like league could become? Because, I mean, I was never anything special on a rugby pitch, but it was a huge part of my life growing up. Yeah. And one too many concussions meant game over. And, until recently, every time I've seen a game of rugby, I've been like, I just want to get back in the mix with that, because it's just so rewarding, and I think it is the best character building sport in the world. But let me just find this here. So, what was the take? I will just get this up, because direct, easy comparison to the NFL, isn't it? Because like for like, major sport, but it's not quite as simple as that. Oh no, has he deleted it? Has my comment scared him off?
You chase him back, did you?
Yeah, I think so. No, I think he's gone. No, here we are. So, scary vision of progress. Went to an NFL game in Wembley. Biggest build-up to the biggest disappointment I've ever seen. Action 3 to 5 seconds and then stops. Different players on and off for different players. 4 hours of boredom trying to be hyped up. The vision of creating events will lead us down the route of ordinary fans being priced out like the Premiership. I'm looking forward to Leinster versus Leicester for 30 quid with a few dirty pints and greasy chips. Thus weekend away, and long may it last. So, to be fair to Brian, the discussion with Rory was just a snippet of a bigger one. Yeah. And Rory's take was essentially that we can learn a lot from the NFL to create that spectacle around the sport to get people that aren't interested in rugby in. But then the question is, how do you keep the ordinary fans happy and make them understand that for the game to survive, they need to potentially, I would argue, get out of the mindset of when I grew up, it was 15 quid a ticket, therefore that's how it should stay. So, what? Obviously, if you had all the answers, you probably wouldn't be working in whiskey. But
I probably still would be.
What do you think? What do you see, having been in the game now, on the fringes of the game, looking at it through a lens of professionalism? What do you see the low-hanging fruit, and then the bigger picture thinking being to improve the situation that the game's in?
I think there's a couple of things. There's a bit of a disconnect between the professional game and the amateur game, no matter where you go. But the amateur game pays for the professional game. They're the people that attend the games, they're the people that buy merchandise, and if they're disgruntled, they don't come to games. And I think I played in Wales for 5 years, and I got a lot of stick for this a couple of weeks ago. So they moved the Ospreys versus Cardiff game to Bridgend, and they play, which I've got no issue with, because there's contractual issues with the Swansea Stadium, so they can't use it. They're not the main tenant there. So they played at Bridgend, fine, not an issue. It was a mud bath, again, not an issue. It's old school rugby, and it's quite entertaining over Christmas. and they parked up a big HGV lorry behind the dead body, and people were watching the game in a trailer with like a leather, the big curtain, like a haulage lorry. And I sort of said, this makes a bit of a joke of the league, and I got a load of stick. This is the best game. It was the best game of the year, and the fans loved it, and it's back to the original days. I'm like, you're completely missing the point. The point I'm trying to make is, at a time like you said, when the game is probably struggling financially, and you need sponsors, and you need to have it at its best as many times as you can when people are watching it. That's not rugby at its best. And if you want people to engage, and you want people to sponsor it, and you want people to get involved, every time you get to showcase it, it's got to be looking spot on. So I think there's a bit about that. I think most teams are, a bit more savvy with it in terms of how they use social media, how they market, how they look for sponsorship. But it's about creating global superstars. And I think there's a few that are doing it. Probably Sia Khaleesi, probably people that are managing to transcend the sport a little bit. The more of those you get in the game, the more global superstars you get, and the more you embrace that, the better the game will be. And I think women's rugby will probably be a big part of that. How do
the Lions Tour just been announced as well.
Exactly. How do you engage 50% of the population? And the reality we have is that most people, I've got kids, they play rugby, the mums are heavily involved. Mums are massive drivers. Certainly in my house, my wife pretty much is the complete, chief of staff in our house. She runs it. She knows exactly what's going on. And if they're not going to play rugby, the mums are a huge part of that. So the women's game would be a huge part moving forward. And it probably, I think, looking at, summer rugby the answer? Is a global international calendar the answer? It's just so confusing and complicated because the game is governed by large bodies who are historically run the game, and they've run the game and made huge amounts of money from it. So what incentive is there to change that?
Yeah,
it's a really tricky one, but I do think playing less games is probably the answer. So you get less average games, making you've got to get teams with bigger playing budgets. You've seen that at the moment. Teams are folding and they don't have the playing budgets, and you're going to end up with leagues with no player budget, a salary cap, where they just end up wiping the floor with other teams.
Do you have faith in the future?
Yeah, I do. I think rugby's. I think it's one of, if not the best team sport to play.
I'd say the.
Yeah, we're biased because we played it, and we're from Scotland, and we're not particularly good at American football or other team sports. But
it's very true. Although, finally, somebody is gonna, other than Jared Haynes, is gonna give it a go with Rees-Zammit, which is an interesting proposition, isn't it? I don't quite understand the mechanics of it, but my understanding is, essentially, the NFL UK have created some sort of a accelerated pathway for those with the skills present already to try and weasel their way into something. But I'll admit I don't know nearly enough about NFL to see where he'd be on a pitch or where his strengths would be. But it's an interesting. I saw a comment there as well, which was the worst possible, terrible decision for his career. Just only money-driven decision.
It's the opposite.
It's just the balance of those two sentences are almost completely. It almost functions as an oxymoron because. Yeah. What is a career for a rugby player? Is it prestige? Is it caps? Is it captaincy? Is it World Cups? What? Nobody can really define other than the individual what that is. And if you've got a short career, a career in a conventional sense usually revolves around financial gain over a long period of time and the progress and building. And if for him it is about the money, then maybe it could be the best decision he's ever made for his career. That's the challenge. But if he's left, that maybe signals a bit of a lack of faith in the direction that things are going.
I'm going to get asked about this. I'm doing the Glasgow game tomorrow, and we're going to talk about it. And my take on it is, first of all, I think it's a really brave decision.
Agreed.
He's 22 years old, and he's a superstar in Wales. It's actually quite hard to grasp just how big of a superstar he is in Wales. Like, he is the poster boy in Wales, and I think financially he's probably earning a good chunk of change from his Gloucester contract plus. International pay plus, and he's a big deal in rugby. So you have sponsorship. He'll be a nobody in NFL. Nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody will care. And people with his athletic profile are everywhere in America. They're everywhere. And
that's the standard.
He'll probably fall quite far down the pecking order of athletic profile and people that played the game their whole life. So yeah, I think the timing of it was quite strange around day before Six Nations, and by all accounts he found out he was approached on the Sunday and made the decision on the Monday.
Wow.
That's the one thing I don't get. How to make that big a decision in that space of time, which speaks to me a little bit of someone that probably was not that happy, or was looking for change, or wasn't totally content with their lot, and is looking to do something different. So, yeah, I think it's going to be tough for him. But he's 22 years old. Can he come back to rugby? Probably he probably could, but it's a huge ask.
It is, and it's time away. Yeah, it's just doing the reps, isn't it? If you've got 2 years of NFL focus coming back to a rugby training ground, you're going to be 2 years of absence in terms of just.
And the game changes.
Yeah.
I think of all the positions that go away as a winger, the way he plays the game, he'll probably be able to come back into the game. Will it tar his reputation? Probably not. I don't think he's young enough, and he was good enough, and he's done enough. He's got 30 odd caps. He's 22 years old. Yeah. He's been on British and Irish Lions tour. He's done a load. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone saw it coming.
No. I selfishly, I would absolutely love it if a Welsh lad made the NFL, because boy went to school with Jamie Gillan.
Oh yeah.
He gave
Scottish Hammer.
The Scottish Hammer.
He's the Giants now, isn't it?
Yeah. So when we were over in New York, he gave us some tickets to go and watch him play. And Erin, my wife, could not comprehend, coming from a enjoyment of rugby growing up in Scotland background, why do they swap over?
Yeah. It's so
so what does Jamie do? Because you look at Jamie, like, he's built like a brick shithouse. He was a really good 10 over here. He can move. He's really dynamic. And his role on the pitch is to punt the ball and the ball, catch it, and then place it very quickly. But he did get roped in to take a conversion a few weeks ago, and he slotted it. So.
Oh, does he hold the ball as well?
So punter receives and holds the ball for the converter. I don't even know the other kicker to kick it in a straight line, never at an angle. Key detail. But yeah, if we had a Scottish lad and a Welsh lad, that's a good thing to just have in the arsenal of things that you can bring up over a few pints. That's a good one to have. But your first cap was in a World Cup.
Yeah,
against New Zealand.
Yeah,
you've kind of peaked on day one, really.
Yeah.
And then your last international game was against Russia in a World Cup.
Not the pinnacle.
Not the pinnacle, but after a long career. So how do you reflect on, especially within that lens of A to Z? How do you reflect on your career as a whole?
That's a big question. First of all, I think I did more than I thought I ever would do playing rugby, and I still vividly remember having a conversation at 17, about to go to uni, study medicine, and I got offered, Glasgow came through the academy and said, look, we're going to start these things called apprenticeships, and it was basically they paid you $6,000 a year to be a full-time rugby player, $6,000 a year, and that's not enough money to live off. No. even back in 2004.
2004, yeah, okay. Yeah, that wouldn't scale up.
No, it doesn't scale up, especially when you use your first paycheck to buy TV. I think from there to, playing for Scotland 3 years later to, across the board playing. I played over 300 professional games. Managed to captain Scotland. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with my lot. And people that can sometimes think I'm being a bit glib about it, but I always had a pretty rounded mindset, and it was just a game. And I got super upset and about non-selection, about games that didn't go my way, but was always aware that this is a game, and that's what it is. People are doing much more important things, and I was really lucky to do it. So I think, of course, I would love to have done more in my career. That's probably. And
are there any things you'd highlight as the more?
I would have loved to have gone on a Lions tour, obviously. And I was never a good enough player to be someone that the Lions tours picked them all year on that tour. But I think if the Lions tours had fallen different years, I probably would have had a better chance of going, because whenever the Lions tours came around, I was either injured or not playing very well, and that was the kind of reality. So I look on with real jealousy at the guys that I know that I retired in 2020. They went to South Africa. So I was kind of still very much attached to the squad, and the guys that I played with, and Scotland had a really good spell through the Six Nations, and loads of guys went. I was like, God, that would have been good.
Do you think, had you not, was your decision in 2019 to retire from international rugby influenced by non-selection for the Lions tour?
No, I just knew the end was nigh. It was kind of, I went to World Cup and didn't play well against Ireland, and then I just knew I'd ruptured my Achilles, managed to get back to the World Cup. And then basically you kind of know when it's time.
I can't remember where I heard you say it, but it was you were thinking ahead to your week off.
Yeah, in a game
at Scarlets. During a game. There was just a bit of a light bulb moment, thinking, that's probably the wrong way to look at things.
Yeah, it was actually my last game. Bizarrely, my last game, it was actually against Cardiff at Murrayfield, and we had a week off the next week. And I remember running around thinking, God, I hope I don't get hurt because I've got a week off next week, and I don't want to be in doing rehab or something. And I remember thinking, this isn't really the right mindset. And I probably wasn't very happy playing then. Edinburgh under Richard Cockrell wasn't a particularly enjoyable place to be. And I just, and that's kind of when COVID happened. And I was like, do I keep moving? Do I keep playing? I moved the family, and I was like, do you know what? That's kind of it. You got to stop at some point. And I'm actually kind of glad it kind of made it quite black and white for me. It was like this is it. Just stop.
Not being happy towards the tail end of your career is kind of reflective of a long period of rugby very much falling into the traditional norms of male communication, sucking things up, not really approaching psychology in a pragmatic way rather than a preventative way. I know Dan Carter was the first one to really speak about using a sports psychologist to enhance his performance rather than as he's seeing that guy behind that door at the end of the corridor. But Graham Morrison was a huge part of your era. And he was the first one out of that group to really come out saying, look, I've not been doing all that well for a few years.
For sure.
How did that impact your core group of players around you yourself? Did that change any reflections on the team, the management, how things unfolded? Did it change anything in you personally? Was it a big turning point, that discussion?
With Graham
and just the general attitude.
So Graham was and is my best friend. He was best man at my wedding, and I was best man at his. And we kind of knew he wasn't very happy. And he'd split up with a long-term girlfriend at the time. And I remember him being like really, really dark. But at the time, I was probably 26. And I was like, I was probably the same. And I feel terrible. And I said this to him, I felt terrible because I was like, come on, let's trying to cajole him. And it was much bigger than that.
Because he's written about that, hasn't he?
Yeah.
That he got, somebody witnessed him having an antidepressant at half time or something.
Yeah.
And somebody chastised him for doing so. And
what
are you doing that for?
Pills and kind of just a total lack of understanding around probably what he was going through. And he's lucky that he's kind of seen through the side of us on the day, and he wouldn't mind me saying, he said, I still have, times when I struggle a little bit. And he, on the face of it, super successful, played 30 all times for Scotland. He's got a great job, family, kids, the lot. He did it. He completed it. But that's actually not true. So I kind of see a lot in my kind of group that, because I was pals with a lot of guys that were slightly older than me, so they retired slightly earlier than me, so I kind of saw them go through the transition before I did. So, and you see it all the time, that guys are, I guess, not necessarily doing well or coping or struggling with it a little bit. So I probably looking back, things like I regret rugby-wise is probably not speaking to a psychologist. Not from I was lucky, I never struggled with mental health issues, I never struggled with depression or anxiety, but I'm not arrogant enough to think that I couldn't or wouldn't or won't. But I just think, would I have got a bit more from my career if I had? Because there's times I struggled and times I didn't necessarily want to play the game or wasn't full of confidence or wasn't able to get the most out of myself. So I think there's a huge amount of stuff that can be done in that space to help players to understand how to get the most out of your brain.
Do you think the narrative as a whole in professional rugby, sport in general, I guess, has shifted in the right direction with that? Because I mean, it was only Nick DeLuca, your era again, very hot on this stuff now, very mindset driven, very performance psychology driven, and there does seem to be a sort of awakening happening in recently retired sports people, which means that there are more prominent sports people that are currently playing that are either A, being more honest about when they've really struggled, or B, being much more open and honest about how they're leveraging an understanding of their own mental health and psychology to become a better player.
Yeah.
Because I think for so long it was viewed as a performance reducer or a weakness or a vulnerability that could be attacked, rather than a way of actually enhancing performance in the way that Johnny Wilkinson, who's now the most profound man in the world, and Dan Carter have leveraged it for actual performance. So the lens that you look at the sport through now, do you think it's moving in the right direction? Do you think there's a long way to go? What do you think the landscape is from a player well-being up here? For those listening, I'm touching my head.
I think it should be compulsory. I think it should be compulsory that you have check-ins with every club should do it. And it shouldn't be that like you say, I've got to go and ask someone because I need some help. Because then you have to overcome a barrier there, which a lot of men and a lot of rugby players would just say, "This is too embarrassing. I'm not going to go and ask for help. It's weakness," and that still exists. So, if I was a team manager or coach or CEO, I would make it compulsory to have check in once a week, and you monitor players, and you're able there to assist and help them regularly, because that's what players need. It shouldn't be wait for something to go drastically wrong to ask for help. It should be, well,
because you wouldn't do that with your ACL, would you?
Yeah. Exactly. You should be speaking to people and you should be asking for help. And I think there's things that can, whether it's performance or whether it's more mental health issues that you're struggling a bit with, how do you actually use that as a tool? Because we spend so much time in the gym and training and fitness, and we neglect, and I neglected it, if I'm honest, totally neglected it, just because I don't know. I'm pretty laid back. I'm pretty, like I said, I was lucky. I didn't struggle with that stuff, but it's not to say that I wouldn't have benefited from someone helping me with my mindset. I didn't necessarily believe that I could get on a Lions tour, going back to your point. I didn't necessarily believe that I was ever good enough to do that stuff. And I've spoken to coaches. I've spoken to coaches on Lions tour, and they said, you were in conversations. I was getting letters to say I was on standby. I was in the pool. And I still didn't quite believe that I was good enough. A bit of imposter syndrome potentially. Scotland were probably viewed as they were probably the worst of the home unions at the time. So why would I believe that when we get drubbed that I could actually kind of elevate myself above that and actually be part of it? But then players did. Stuart Hogg did, Finn Russell did, and you look at the group now and they've got a bigger belief now. So that's, from my selfish point of view, how could I have used it to enhance my own self-confidence and belief? That probably would have been what I used it for. But I think there's a bit of a ways to go, is probably the way to answer it. I think is getting there, but if you're having to ask for help, we haven't got it quite figured out yet.
Agreed. In terms of the last sentence as a statement, agreed. I think it should become second nature, in the same way that strength and conditioning is there to reinforce all of the biomechanical movement patterns, tendons, ligaments that make up a effective rugby player. There is a brain behind that needs to make decisions, that needs to be switched on. And if you're going into a game, like, for example, Graham's mentioned he was at certain points, you're not going to get the best out of that player. And off the pitch, that person's then going to be reflecting on a negative game. You're going to have Kevin from down the road on Twitter saying he's a dickhead and that he could have done it had he not snapped his ankle when he was 12. All this usual stuff. But I think against that context, your transition out of rugby, the inevitable identity questioning and the sort of crisis that comes from that process, your career ended not on unsavoury terms, but not in the way that you'd hoped.
Yeah. Where
your contract was essentially called into question as a result of injury, wasn't it? And it kind of talk us through what how it came to an end, and B, how you felt coming out of that process, thinking, okay, I'm on my own now. What happens next?
I guess I'll start. So I was at Scarlets, playing in the best team in the league at the time, won the league, runners up the following season, and then kind of a sense of as teams grow under small budgets, players look for more money, and that's the reality. Is you have to kind of rebuild the team. And I kind of got to the point with Scarlets, and I thought, I had 3 kids, it's time to come home. And it was a selfish decision from me personally. It wasn't necessarily a rugby decision. I thought maybe I could come home and get looked after by the union a bit. Ruptured my Achilles in my last game for Scarlets, got a DVT from the surgery, and basically came back to Edinburgh, and within 6 months was kind of called into the office and said, every contract has this clause. If you're injured for 6 months, in England it's 9 months, everywhere else is 9 months, in Scotland it's 6 months, we have the right to renegotiate your contract, and if you don't agree, terminate your contract.
I'm right in thinking that up until this point it almost never happened before.
Never happened before.
It's not done generally.
Well, certainly not to... I was Scotland captain at the time.
Yeah.
So that, which was, it's definitely not a woe is me, but it kind of brought a bit of clarity to my mind around, talk about rugby family and rugby loyalty. And it was actually, well, you're going to totally shaft me. I moved my whole family, I bought a house, relocated, and they offered me 50% of my pay. And it actually made it, if they had said 20%, I maybe would have considered it. It was 50%, and it was just, I can't even pay my mortgage. So I can't do this. So I basically said, look, I'll retire. I had a ruptured Achilles. I couldn't walk still. 6 months in, I couldn't walk properly. I was like, well, I'll have to stop. Long story short, we kind of figured out a way to piece it together. But I knew 6 months into a contract, and I hadn't played a game for the club, that I wasn't going to be part of the club long term. because it was almost impossible to recover that situation from a trust point of view. So I kind of knew, and then went to World Cup, didn't go to plan, came back, and then COVID happened. So I kind of ended up, we talked about it, I made the decision to retire, and then I kind of struggled a little bit with the initial kind of transition. COVID bizarrely made it easier because I knew I had to do something. So I kind of knew for a while that it was coming around the corner, whether it was that year or the next year, it was going to happen. I was really lucky. Actually, rupturing my Achilles was bizarrely one of the best things that happened long term to me, because it gave me an opportunity to work in the media, and I got to do it when I was Scotland captain. And I probably wouldn't have been given those opportunities, or I don't know if they would have presented themselves in the same way for a sustained period. So it gave me an opportunity to do that, and then kind of got in that door, and then I kind of moved into the whiskey stuff. Had an opportunity there, and didn't have a clue, to be honest. I mean, it's laugh. I still laugh. Like, my first few weeks in meetings, like Googling every single acronym. I was like, P&L, what's that going to be? And people thought, I literally understood nothing about business. So the guy, my boss, he took a bit of a punt on me, and I've repaid it. I've managed to figure it out. So, but yeah, I think as happy as I've been. I think I've got the balance right at the moment. That's not to say it won't change. I stay involved in the game, which I really enjoy through commentary and punditing and presenting, and actually doing something away from the sport has been really healthy for me. So it's is there a bit of luck involved? Probably. I think you kind of create your own luck, and I did a lot of stuff off, in my last couple of years, meeting people, and you're like, why? People like, go and grow your network. I'm like, why? What the heck? Who? Why? How? Where? And I showed up for a job interview in the wrong city. It was meant to be in Queen Street, and I showed up in Queen Street, Edinburgh, and it was in Edinburgh, and it was in Glasgow. I totally fucked up. Like, I was a rugby player who'd had my hand held through 16 years, and you're like, well, on you go. So it happens, and you've got to kind of piece together the next phase. And I've got mates now that are retiring. You've got to piece it together, and you've got to work through it. And the reality is that no one does it for you. The unions will help as best they can, but actually you've got to go out there and do it yourself.
The pressure of having to land on your feet with a family, with kids, with a mortgage, how did that compare to the pressure of leading your country?
That's a different pressure. I remember in COVID thing, and I was genuinely looking at things I could sell to sit at my job. And I was like, we're in COVID, and who the hell is going to employ a retired ex-rugby player who has no commercial skills? And no one's going to set up their own businesses, no one's investing. And it's probably the first time in my life I've been financially stressed. And it's probably the only time where I've actually lay in bed at night and thought, what the hell am I going to do here? How am I going to figure this out? Because like I said, I've got bills to pay, I've got mortgages, I've got kids, I've got all these responsibilities. And it's me that's responsible. In comparison to, captaining your country, I don't know, captaincy was something that I quite enjoyed. Again, if I had my chance again, would I have done it differently? I don't know if I could, because I kind of did it as the way I thought it should be done. And I did it probably I molded probably by players that I really respected as captain. So I found the stress of captaincy probably, it's different to the kind of stress of retiring and trying to provide. It's a different kind of stress, but it's still that stress of you're not providing financially, but you're providing guidance and the burden of leading and leadership and being the guy that people look to for answers. In that regard, it is very similar. But again, it was just fun. It was meant to be fun. It was a sport.
Game.
It was a game,
yeah.
And
whereas being a parent is less of a game.
It's less of a game, yeah. But I do think there was times when I, talk about being financially stressed and not sleeping. Actually, throughout my career, I slept and I never had problems. The only time I struggled was when I was captain, and bad game, bad individual performances. Some games where I didn't probably do the things that I expected myself and others to do. That's probably the times where I lay in bed and I thought, I'm not doing this very well.
The Netflix documentary.
Yeah.
What's it called? Contact. Something
I
contact. The word contact in there is all I know.
Yeah.
I think it's out on Wednesday.
I think it will be. Yeah.
So this will be very well timed.
Yeah.
In fact,
You're welcome, Netflix.
Jamie, clip starts here. What do you want the outcome of the behind the curtain look at the Six Nations to be? Because I think against the discussion we had earlier of the future of the game, how to make people buy into its future more, this feels like a pretty big component of that. So what do you want the outcome of the Netflix insight to be for the game and the players?
I think if you look at the people who produced it, the ones that did Drive to Survive, is it Breakpoint is the tennis one?
Yep.
And the golf one, which I can't remember what it's called. And I think that the whole point of, and I think by all accounts, the engagement in Formula One in particular has gone through the roof. Off the back of it.
Yeah, Drive to Survive is more entertaining than F1.
Yeah, totally.
Jamie watches Drive to Survive, and whenever I talk about F1, he rolls his eyes.
I'm probably the same.
Actually,
I've never watched F1, but I watch it, and I'm like, yes, another series is out, yes. And I think
what's Gunther doing? What's Gunther doing? He actually left Haas.
Yeah, he's just moved.
Gone,
so that's probably where you want it to happen. And I think tennis was probably similar in terms of the documentary's brilliant and creating storylines which you don't necessarily see. I don't know how it's going to work in a team. Probably my one concern, how you showcase individuals in a team sport is probably the challenge. But I'm the same. I don't necessarily understand NFL, but I've always watched the Hard Knocks documentaries. I'll watch any documentary, any sports documentary.
Have you seen the Wrexham documentary yet?
Yeah.
I think big claim. I think it's the best docuseries ever made.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant.
The story, the threads they pull on.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's engaging, and I think that's probably the challenge for rugby is how do you get people engaged who don't necessarily watch the game? And I think the hope is, I guess, that people will watch that and it becomes not just rugby people. People will go on Netflix and see it and think, well, I've not really watched rugby. Because I don't play American football. I'm a very average tennis player. I'm a very average golf player. But I watch all of them. And it's probably made me watch more of them. And it's made me watch more sport in general. So I think that's probably the biggest outcome that can come off it is probably, big picture is commercially, will that engage people and they'll see something which they haven't seen before, and the other part is how does it become a more global game? How do you engage people that potentially weren't engaged previously?
So the question that sits behind all that is, do you think the infrastructure, systems and people that operate and run rugby in the UK are prepared for the potential upside that could come from this?
I think there was a reluctance to actually do the documentary. I think they had to all agree, obviously, and I think a couple of home unions were very reluctant to give access to behind the scenes. And I think they obviously agreed in the end. But that kind of narrow-mindedness of like, oh, I don't want it's our little secret, and we don't want the world to know. And it's actually like, well, there's something bigger here, and you're kind of custodians to actually grow this game, even though when you're in it. If someone says to me, oh, you're a custodian, you're growing the game. I don't care about that. When you're a player, you just don't care. You want to play and you want to win and you want to play well. So they have to be. I think the opportunity is massive. There was a premiere and people, all eyes are going to be on it, and the timing of it's great before the Six Nations. And the Six Nations is an amazing competition. Crowds, engagement, fans. But what happens in April? When the Six Nations and the cameras aren't there. That's the challenge is how do you Netflix Six Nations and how do you keep people really engaged beyond the Six Nations?
Less, as you said, less games probably because health is a huge component of this, and the game's people are getting big. I mean, centres are basically back rows that can move a little bit quicker now. It's frightening. It is frightening. I don't even know. I used to play back row. I don't know the rules of a scrum anymore. I'm watching it on TV and everyone's like, oh, what's that? Why is the whistle blowing? I'm like, honestly,
no. Try commentating.
I have no idea.
Yeah, honestly.
just make it up sometimes.
Oh, yeah. And then I get people abuse you online for getting it wrong. I'm like, well, I don't know. The referee doesn't know. So I'm making a fist of it here.
It's difficult to keep, but those parameters and measures need to be in place for the health of the players because, I mean, as somebody who's had, what I was good at on a rugby pitch was getting from a scrum to a ruck and getting over the ball. Turnovers were my thing. That was basically my only use. Yeah. But it meant that the amount of times I was badgering my way over a ball and getting hit in the head was one too many times. And that meant that a game that I loved, the community that I loved, my day-to-day, week-to-week was immediately just, that's it. No, you've been hit in the head one too many times. You can't play any more contact sports.
Do you know how many concussions you had?
3 and 4 weeks. So you're thinking, hang on, there's meant to be a gap of 3 weeks between them.
Yeah.
But Magnus Bradbury.
Yeah, Maggie.
On a Canada tour.
Are you the same age as him?
I was year below him. Yeah.
Okay.
So we were on a Canada tour. and we were on a lazy river in a water park, and I felt my trunks get pulled through a donut, and I thought, uh-oh, here we go. And then next thing I know, I'm under the water, out of the water, thinking, okay, I'm in the air, yep. And then head first back. Accuracy was fantastic, to be fair. Back through the donut, head smashes off the floor. This was 2 weeks after the first concussion. But because it wasn't during a rugby match, nobody anywhere, staff, nothing considered that it had been a concussion, because I just hit my head at Water Park. Still, boys being boys. And then back, Tynedale 10s, I went back to my first game and got knocked unconscious over a ruck. And we couldn't piece together why it was so bad for a while. And it was like, right, okay, well, actually, if you look at this logically, you probably got concussed or exacerbated an existing concussion in the second. Yeah. So the third one was really bad. And even at the time, I mean, there was a specific member of staff that I never saw eye to eye to on a cricket or a rugby pitch, and he tried to put me back on because we needed players. And I'm like, I have just come back from unconsciousness. Yeah. You fucking idiot.
Yeah, that's mad.
And that wasn't long ago. I think it was there was a documentary that came out on the NFL. I can't remember what it was called. Had quite a big impact, and then the narrative really started to develop. It got taken more seriously. Yeah. Everybody had done a concussion test. It got looked at as a...
So you were in your teens then?
Yeah, it was. It just turned 18, I think. Yeah, so it was. That was it. And again, I would never. I mean, I had ambitions of playing professional rugby when I had puberty hit me like a train at the age of 12. So
you were that guy. You were the big guy.
It was physics. It wasn't rugby skill. It was pure physics.
He was the big person.
And then everybody else caught up, and I thought, oh, you're actually not that remarkable at this game. And that was it. But it doesn't matter, because it was so rewarding and so valuable to me that whatever level I played at, having that taken away was damaging. I filled the gap with self-driven health and fitness, and then powerlifting, and now here we are. But that was before everyone was enormous, and the impact was as high as it is, and the ambition was as high as it is, and that's going to get worse and worse and worse. And I think if you're in rugby and you've grown up around it, you see the value beyond that potential risk, because everything's got a risk.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But in 10 years' time from now, I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday who was here, Melrose Rugby Club. He's from Melrose, beating heart of the community there. Sevens, birthplace.
Yeah, loves it.
The rugby club, post-COVID, has gone from being about 85% of the participation in children to swinging almost, he reckons, 60-40 to the football club, because football could play sooner than rugby could after things started opening up again, which meant that community developed and they never came back to rugby. So there's this generation of kids growing up in Melrose that have aligned themselves with football rather than rugby. And the downstream effect of that, against the context that we've discussed, I see rugby and the development it's given me as giving me the foundations to do all the stupid shit I do now, from a training point of view and a character building point of view. And I would love for my kids that don't yet exist to have that experience in the future. But a lot of the question today has been focused around what does that future look like? Because you've got 3 kids.
Yeah.
Your wife's very bought in.
Yeah.
But is there a part of you that thinks risk, reward here? And that's coming from somebody that's taken the game to the extremes.
Yeah. That's the other thing I talk about. Things I get asked a lot is around kids playing, what I let the kids play. I almost retired at one point because of head knocks. So I had my first concussion when I was 19 and got knocked unconscious for 5 minutes, swallowed my tongue, in hospital for overnight, scans. So really, really bad. And then I had a crazy thing to say, but I was lucky in that my concussions, when I got them, I was unconscious. So there was no choice of playing. And that's the real danger, isn't it? They talk about is when you, in a second, I don't know what they call it, get a concussion and playing again and playing again.
Yeah, concussion syndrome. Yeah.
So I was quite lucky that in that regard, not lucky to get concussed, obviously, or be unconscious, but it removed me from the field. So I had probably 4 concussions, known concussions. I've got friends that played amateur rugby who had concussions and probably had less treatment than I did, or less awareness, or less, care. So I was never forced to play. I was never asked to play when I was concussed. I was never forced back. I always had always viewed it as something very serious. Obviously it is. Which sounds a crazy thing to say, but I know I played in Wales and guys would play with concussions. And I'd say, how you feel? I'm not good. Why are you playing? I'm out of contract this year. I'm a young guy, I've got to play. And that's never going to change until you find an objective tool which measures concussion, which says you cannot play. We won't get there. But yeah, I think the kids' game is safer than it's ever been. I think, yeah, to your story and to, I remember at school watching a cup final at Dollar playing Merchiston, actually. It was probably 2002, and the guy, Jonathan White, Joffe, Scotland Rugby team's he was meant to be the next big thing. He got concussed and staggering all over the pitch, crab walking, and he came back on and played. And I'm like, that's mad. Yeah, that's madness that was ever allowed. But that was the way the game was managed, and there's no understanding. I think that would never happen now.
No.
And kids now, I've got my eldest is 10. And there's a kid in his class who hit his head, and you can't play for a couple of weeks now. And there's just so much. I think the point I'm trying to make is the kids' game is safer. The kids' game is not faster. Kids are not bigger than they were.
Where do you think that threshold crosses?
Probably when you get kids who are still kids at 16, 17 playing with men. So going to professional rugby, and I think I watch school rugby now, and it's a much faster game than when I played. And there's S&C, and there's diet, and there's pathways, and there's loads of going on. So I think it definitely reaches a point where there's got to be a bit more of an awareness around it. But you're not going to make the game safe, and that's not a popular thing to say, and it will never be a safe game.
In the same way that you can't make F1.
You can't drive the car safely.
As safe as it can be,
exactly.
But if you crash into a wall at 200 miles an hour,
it's mitigating risk. How do you mitigate risk? How do you make parents feel confident enough that if there's head knocks, they're going to be looked after? How do you limit contact at training? I think contact at training, I didn't do any at the end of my career, because I was falling apart. But Scarlets was great. We basically did none. It's like we were playing well, and it's like we don't need to do contact. But then I came to Edinburgh. It was like we do contact every day. We're tackling every day. And I'm like, why are we tackling every day? And I had shoulder surgeries, wrist surgeries, concussion, bulging disc. I'm not tackling every day. I've tackled for 30 years. I know how to tackle.
But you knew that because of experience.
Yeah, and the young guys wouldn't have that confidence. And I was confident enough to say, do you know what? And I would always back up at the weekends. So I don't think you have to train contact. I actually think there's no reason to train. We would call it bone on bone. So without pads in training, I don't think there's any need for it. Maybe in pre-season, but I think that's probably the way to make the game safer. Limit training, which is by all accounts they're doing it. Play less games. I know there's constant studies into how to improve concussion awareness. How do you improve return to play protocol? But it's much better than it was. It's much better than it was. And the game's not the game. People, and this is the thing that frustrates people. Say the game is faster. People aren't bigger, or that certainly 2007, 2008 was when I think it was probably the biggest.
I think the 15 players on the pitch as a whole are larger, but the actually, I think, I mean,
the reason for
centres, centres specifically.
The reason for increased concussions, is the ball's in play longer now.
Yeah,
the way the game's refereed now is actually the ball is in play for 50% more time. You've got 50% more collisions. You're asking players to do more in the time that the ball's live. There's an expectation that front row forwards are not just scrummaging; they're involved in high speed collision impacts. So actually, the game's not necessarily. It's better coached and it's a bit quicker. Is that the ball's in play a lot longer? So the demand on players is better. S&C and science and nutrition and all that stuff. There's a bigger understanding of how to get more out of players. So you're asking, and the demands are greater on players. But your brain, it takes one knock, and your brain says night night.
A lot of this probably applies to the NFL as well, and just other contact sports in general. Is you can only push it so far before the risk starts spilling over the reward curve. But I should say as well, I feel absolutely zero resentment for all staff, barring the one that tried to put me back on at Tynedale Turns or Water Park Shenanigans, because it was a reflection of the times.
Yeah,
and it was good crack. And at the end of the day, it was a risk of playing. It was a risk of playing the game at the time. I just sort of found myself in this 4-week window where life didn't go the way that ideally on paper it would have gone. But that's how things unfold. But I think final question against the sort of transition you've been through from a rugby to turning up in the wrong city for your job interview to now.
I was hungover as well, which didn't help. It was a bad hangover.
I bet the self-loathing was pretty remarkable that day.
Yeah, I sat in my car questioning whether I was ever going to get a job.
You haven't helped yourself here, John.
No.
What do you want the future to look like? Career, personal life, kids. What do you see it looking like for you? Because you've had a lot of experience, a lot of travel, a lot of exposure to lots of many things through the sport of rugby. But how are you gonna manifest that as a forward motion for you as an individual?
Do you know, I was thinking before I came in, I was thinking about this last night, and we were talking about training earlier and like why I train now, and it's kind of quite depressing. The reality is that I'm kind of almost midlife now, and I remember my dad turning 40, and I remember my mum, dad, and parents, friends turning 40. And you're kind of there now, and I feel like I'm still 23. But you kind of realize that you got to look after your body, and you got to look after your mind, and I don't want to be. It's quite serious. I don't want to be that kind of person that gets to 65 and it's all kind of gone past. I think this is probably the prime time in my life. Certainly, I think you're young, you're 20s, you're essentially just being an idiot when you're playing rugby. That you're just living your best life. You're with your mates. You're getting well paid, looked after. I think the next sort of phase of my life is about. I'm really enjoying it, but I kind of realize that. One of my favorite things I say is days are short, the days are long, but the years are short. Like you blink and like I've got a 10-year-old son. It's like you blink again and you're gonna be 20.
Yeah.
It's like how do I get the most out of the next 10, 15 years to really set myself up so I can retire? Probably as a financial goal. It's I don't want to be working when I'm 70. I don't want to be working when I'm 60 probably. So selfishly, how do I put myself in a position to do that? But how do I also work-life balance is the biggest challenge for anyone now. You go from a position where you got lots of free time as a rugby player to actually you don't realize how much free time you have when you're playing sport. So now it's like, I've got 3 kids, I work most weekends, I've got a full-time job, I've got to provide, the kids are in school. How do I actually make sure that there's time for me to really make sure that I'm looking after myself well? Because you talk about mental health, it can easily creep up on you to the point where you're like, I'm not doing very well here. So I think it's about continual growth. I think career-wise, I want to keep doing presenting. I'd love to stay involved in sport, but I'm also realistic that the next cab off the rank when someone retires is, there'll be a time when my face doesn't fit anymore with sport, and that's okay. And I'm totally aware of that. How do I grow my own career and find a niche where I'm really happy doing it? So that's probably where I'd like to get to. Don't know if I really answered your question properly, but I think that's the aim for me. Is how do you I'm driven. I want to keep progressing selfishly with my own career, but I don't want to work myself to the ground. I don't want to be one of those guys that literally lives to work. That's not why. That's what rugby gave me real clarity on. Is that you're not here just to work. It's that you're meant to actually enjoy what you do, and if you don't, then kind of what's the point?
Full stop.
Full stop. Period.
There we are. Period. Yeah, I didn't want to say period against the not to upset any more Americans having slandered NFL here, but no, very very fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed that, and
thanks for having me.
I think you're right. The questions you've just asked are the questions I'm constantly asking myself, as I'm very much somebody that lives to work at the moment. And whilst I love every element of it, when I feel like the bucket's overspilling a bit, it's like, oh fuck, hang on.
Yeah.
How do we pull this back? And I've often put myself in a position where it's very difficult to pull back from. So keep asking questions is kind of what I expect my answer to be in 10 years' time, and 10 years' time after that.
Yeah.
And if I've ever got the answers, then I've probably got complacent. And
well, I'll come find out if you've got the answers.
No, mate, really enjoyed that. I'm conscious that we've timed that perfectly. It's 9:01. So
nice work.
Good man.
Thanks, mate.
See you soon.
Cheers.